Breath of the Wild is big, bold, and beautiful, but we've already got some insight into the future of the Zelda franchise. What's up, everybody? It's Zach from Switchforce, joined as always by Gabe and Jake. And today, in an interview with Famitsu Magazine, Aonuma gave some thoughts on the direction that The Legend of Zelda is headed. Famitsu asked, making the next Zelda game might be more difficult if you choose to make it an open-air game. What will evolve open-air? How will you make future dungeons? What will the next Zelda title be like? And Aonuma replied, I think that in the future, open-air games will be the standard for Zelda, which is a very interesting departure from the history of the franchise, and I think it reveals that they had such a good time and are so proud and enjoyed the development and the result of Breath of the Wild that that's kind of where Link is going to be in the foreseeable future, in these open world, more expansive, bigger, bolder Zelda. So today we're talking about how we feel about that, what that means, and what we might like to see from the next iteration. So Jake and Gabe, fill me in on how you feel with Aonuma's thoughts.
Let's let the resident Zelda expert Gabe do his thing.
I feel conflicted, really, because part of what makes or what has made Zelda like special throughout its history is the fact that for the most part, and there are exceptions, each game has been like wholly different than the previous one for the most part, just stylistically, also visually, things like that. Of course, we have like outliers like Majora's Mask and Ocarina kind of connecting, and Twilight Princess even kind of like fits into this same mold. But you know, I like every once in a while to have like Wind Waker or Skyward Sword, even though that's like not really as liked or as well revered as any of the other ones. But you got to remember, my favorite game of all time is like one of the most linear Zelda games that there is, A Link to the Past. So I feel like if we just keep and open world Zelda's great. I love Breath of the Wild, but I don't want it to exclusively just be open. And maybe they make like smaller games like Spirit Tracks or Phantom Hourglass or something like that are more akin to like quote unquote traditional stuff. Even those games aren't really traditional. But I don't know. I think I'm gonna miss having like, you know, a set amount, a set number of dungeons, and like, you know, you get your boomerang and you get your hookshot and you use those to solve the puzzles in the dungeon. Like, there's something to that to me. And I don't know, maybe it's just because like I have this like very, very like hardcore nostalgia for older Zelda games. I don't know why we can't have both. Like, sure, make the next Zelda game like open world and you know, make it visually similar to Breath of the Wild. But you know, after that, like a couple Zelda games from now, give us something traditional again. Like I personally like that stuff, and I'm afraid of where the series would go if it's just like strictly open world, because then you can't have fun with the visuals as much. Like how do you like?
Oh, you totally can. I don't think this limits the artistic style in any way. I think you could go hyper realistic. I think you could go back to cell shaded. I think you could do a whole lot, and I think you can even mess with the formula quite a bit. Open world, open air. You know, I think that just speaks more to the size, the scope, and maybe the lack of linearity. But I don't think that the mechanics and the graphics are all going to retain this exact Breath of the Wild feel forever.
Well, I would hope not, because, and I know this is like divisive, and some people are for it, some people are against it. Like things like weapon durability and like your stamina working the way it does in Breath of the Wild. While it's great for Breath of the Wild, I don't know that that's how I want. I mean, and you know, who's to say that that's how they I don't know if that's what he means, but I don't want my weapons to break in every Zelda game. Like, I like it for this game. I like it a lot for this game, but I don't want that. Like, I don't know. I'm afraid it'll turn into like a Elder Scrolls thing where it's like super small changes and like, yeah, like the quote unquote stories like different and like the NPCs are different and the side quests are different. But like, I don't play Elder Scrolls a lot, so like I hope I don't get beat up for this. But like, to me, like Skyrim and Morrowind and what's the one before Oblivion, like they're not all like super different from each other. And again, I'm speaking from a place of ignorance. I don't like, that's not my type of game really. I don't like fantasy stuff, so I'll jump into them a little bit, but like other than them like looking better, like just visually and conceptually, it's the same game, really. So
I mean, I think the same could be said for if you kind of look through the Zelda. I mean, I know there are additions and differences, but you know, is there really that much of a difference as you go through Ocarina?
Yes, there is a difference between even Ocarina and Majora's Mask, which are basically
Majora has
brother and sister.
like, sure, but it has the system is
Yeah,
vastly different in terms of the time
and
mechanic.
that's what I mean. Like,
but like look at Skyward Sword versus Ocarina.
they're different, very different.
They're very different.
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay, Jake, tell me, this being such a big, bold Zelda, a Zelda that people probably are spending more time with than any Zelda before, does that then make you feel like that's sort of a one and done? Like you just want this to be this one classic Zelda that is revered for all time? Or does it make you say, hey, this is what I want from the franchise going forward?
Well, I'm going to start off by saying that I generally usually hate open world games, and I love Breath of the Wild. So that says something, because it's not like a typical open world. And Gabe was saying like, oh, I want like a set number of dungeons. Well, there kind of already is. There's like the 4 divine beasts that are kind of like dungeons. And I think that like, I don't think that Aonuma meant to just make, here's Breath of the Wild 2.0 on a new like terrain. Like I think that maybe they just mean more of the less linear. What you have to do, the forest dungeon, then the water dungeon, and then the fire dungeon. But I think that they could sort of tone it back a little bit. Like I guess find like a middle ground where it is open world, and maybe you don't get like how Gabe wants, one item to complete each dungeon and use it very specifically for specific puzzles. But I kind of like having multiple like items. Like you just start with the Sheikah Slate loaded up with a few different things that you can use, and then you have to figure out which one you're supposed to be using for the puzzle, and then use it to solve the puzzle. I think that's kind of a cool mechanic. But I think that they can find a happy middle ground where maybe the next Zelda isn't as huge of a map and isn't as open, but it still has a lot of the freedom to roam and explore that Breath of the Wild has. But maybe it has more smaller dungeons instead of 100 plus shrines and 900 Korok seeds. It has more bigger, like 8 main dungeons or something that you can do in different orders, or have tiers like. You complete these 4 dungeons, and then you get to this next area, and then there's 4 more dungeons. You can do any of those in any way. I think there's a lot of flexibility and room of how they could do that. But I don't think they're just going to make another. I think Breath of the Wild should stay sort of special. Like it was, a game that they worked on for a very long time. It launched with the Switch, which is a brand new system too. And I think those two kind of just pair together as like a very unique experience. So I trust Nintendo enough that I don't think they're just going to make another Breath of the Wild clone like Gabe is afraid of with like Oblivion, Skyrim. I don't think that will happen, but I do think that they like you were saying, like saw the joys of exploring on your own. And I think now that I said it out loud, like that tiered version almost would be really cool, where you kind of like start in one area, almost like starting the Great Plateau, but make it way more better and longer than the Great Plateau. And then have like 4 dungeons there, and then you get like some upgrades. And then you go to like a newer area and have to complete like 4 dungeons there before getting to Ganon or something. Would be really cool. But that's what I think they're gonna find some sort of middle ground between the two.
I just don't want it to become a how big can Zelda get type thing. Because like for other open world games, that's kind of what they're about. Like, oh, look at this, it's so big, you can go so high up. Like there's so many NPCs you can talk to. Yeah, but all the NPCs are
making something bigger than the Breath of the Wild map.
Yeah, like
that'd just be insane.
Look, the scope of Breath of the Wild to me is as big as it should get. Hopefully, it doesn't get bigger. Like, hopefully, Hyrule isn't like riddled with like NPCs that are all saying the exact same thing. Like stuff like that is what I want to keep out of Zelda personally.
Right, and I mean, you could do stuff like think about like how they have had different like environments like in the sky and Skyward Sword, or like the Twilight Realm and Twilight Princess, where like so you could have like 2 maps that are smaller in size, but still each one's kind of open world and has like dungeons that you complete and stuff. There, like I feel like they have a ton of history with Zelda of like switching it up and using different environments that they're not going to just make it super stale and be like, here's another open world game for you to do the same stuff, but just with different skins on enemies.
I take the approach. I think that this sort of style of Zelda offers the most flexibility for differentiation. I think that eventually you run the linear tutorial dungeon weapon collection into the ground. And I think that is what they tried to avoid here. And I think, how many years have we heard the same old Zelda, same old Mario, and they have done things within both franchises to try and expand upon that. And I do think there's a place to still have the more 2D Zeldas. You still can, if they eventually merge 3DS and Switch development, you still can have your, Minish Cap style or your Spirit Track style Zelda game that does retain more of those old school mechanics. But I think that this open world style gives them way more options. I mean, in terms of places that you can put, in terms of how you can have the player interact with the world. There's more variety in this Zelda than any Zelda game before it. Look at all the different things you can do. Look how you spend your time. I think about my play sessions. Sometimes I'm in dungeons. Sometimes I'm just collecting armor. Sometimes I'm just battling guys. Sometimes I'm cooking. Sometimes I'm completing shrines. Sometimes I'm looking for Korok seeds. Sometimes I'm just uncovering more of the map. There's so much flexibility here, and someone in the thread on NeoGAF about this article made a really good point, which is it would be a disservice to The Legend of Zelda and to the fans to just throw away this entire system, engine, and all the groundwork they did for this. Because now, with all of that laid out, you could expand, okay? So you could do things that incorporated more elements or more weapons or more items that manipulated the environment. Things think back to how, even as simple as the Ocarina or the Wind Waker could affect the wind or affect things like that. Now you could bring in items that make the physics even more malleable, allow you to modify things. And we know that they had the runes that allow you to pick up and lift, but with those systems already in place, you can expand and you can take this to other locations. It doesn't have to just be, another Hyrule with a different art style. And they could really, I think, launch Zelda so that it is staying fresh consistently. And something we've seen, this week the Ukulele reviews came out, and that's a game that really tried to stay true to the nostalgia, and it for a lot of people didn't work. And I think that it's smart of Nintendo to find ways to keep what Zelda is, but manipulate it enough so that it fits into a 2017 mold, and eventually a 2020 mold, and eventually a 2025 mold, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's smart to just recreate the same game, and I think there was beginning to be a little fatigue with the 3, 4, 5, 6 hours of intro, collect the boomerang, collect the hook shot, fight the bosses, do the patterns, and we definitely want, I think, more dungeons and some more structure in the next one. I love the Divine Beast, and I'd love to see them make a giant set of those, or scrap the beast and just do big dungeons. Look how fun it is to explore the world in the mountains and just climb. Imagine if they created some massive dungeons where it was like, almost like different biomes within the dungeons that you could explore, and had more of that like climbing and all of that environmental manipulation within a much bigger space. So you could have a whole a huge underwater seascape dungeon, or a huge, cliffside ruins dungeon. And I think that then you're beginning to fuse some of the past elements with this more modern style and what frankly is a much more complex game design.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want Zelda games to stay the same forever. That's not what I mean either. I just, I hate to, I don't want them to become tropey. And maybe they were becoming tropey, just with their own stuff, instead of using other people's blueprint, they were using their own blueprint a little too often. And sure, I get it. Skyward Sword was the reception for it was what it was because it wasn't different enough. But you also got to remember, I don't know if either of you recalls this, but back when Skyward Sword originally came out, I forgot who at Nintendo specifically it was, but someone said I think it the motion control works so great. I don't know if we ever make another Zelda game without motion control. And here it is. We have a Zelda game without motion control. So I feel like Nintendo kind of gets excited sometimes, and them saying, I don't know if we ever make another Zelda game that isn't open world. You will. I'm sure you will. And it'll be fun, and it'll be fine. And my only I love open world Zelda. It's fantastic. Breath of the Wild is for sure in my top 3 Zelda games ever, for sure. But I don't want every Zelda game to be open. That's my only thing. Sure, if you want to make the next one open, go ahead. You want to take advantage of the fact that you built this engine and these physics work so well, and you want to expand on that for the next game. By all means, go ahead. But then the game after that, give us a not Wind Waker specifically, but something akin to that, to where it's wholly different.
Yeah, and I think it's important also to recognize their open world, their vision of open world is very different than any other. I mean, you play a game like a Ghost Recon Wildlands and a Horizon and a Zelda back-to-back, and they all have very different takes on open world. And I'd venture to say that Breath of the Wild is the most distinct of those. So to me, it's less open world, and I like the term open air because I think it gives the sense that, hey, this is a Zelda game that just happens to be in a much bigger, area, right? A much bigger walled-off zone that you get to play in. Than an open world hey, I know there's quests and stuff, but it's not the same as driving around New York and in GTA and doing some more of the monotonous tasks there. I do think that if you look, how many enemies are in this game, right? now that they have this built, imagine just a much more fully fleshed out world that has different areas, different species, a whole lot more depth to it. And I think that if you look at the history of really any game franchise, scrapping the last and doing something from the ground up, I mean, I guess it works occasionally, but in general, it's good to build. And I think that they have now sort of reached a new plateau, a great plateau, if you will, and that they should use this to vault forward rather than, jump backwards. I guess with that being said, are there a few things that you guys can think of that you'd like to see in the next Zelda, assuming it is more open like this? Are there some things that you would like more of from the next Breath of the Wild?
I think the first way to like expand something like this is to like really go into like stats, like deep. Like, yes, this game has stats, but think of like Dark Souls, how like different armors. Like,
No.
yes, like different armors give you different stats, and like slow roll, like when you're too heavy, and being
So
able.
you
to...
wanted to really double down on the RPG.
Yeah, at least for this next one. Like, if you're gonna set it like in a similar world to Breath of the Wild, I think that's the next natural thing. Like, you make the weapons like super stat based, and like hopefully they don't break as much anymore. I don't know. I feel like that's where you go with it.
I feel like that's becoming way too open world RPG. And talk about wanting to get away from that, Gabe. You're proposing that they do go bigger and more in depth in that way. And I think
just for one, and then
no, but I think the charm of like of Zelda and like Nintendo games in general is like their accessibility, and then like it still has some depth to it, but it's not like incredibly in depth. And I think that for me, I would just want to see a new environment, kind of like how they've done with like Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword compared to like Ocarina of Time. More enemy variety or new enemies, and more linear dungeon based thing. Because like dungeons in Breath of the Wild are just kind of like 4 shrines smashed together. So I think it'd be cool if they had like an open world game still, but kind of brought it a little bit more linear and like had some bigger set pieces that you entered into and like were in there for like an hour or 2 or 3. So again, finding like middle ground. I think if you went and had all these stats, I mean they already have like movement speed up, like, and like attack up and stuff like that. And yeah, it's not like super sophisticated. It's hard to like know exactly what it's doing. But I think if you went and made everything super stat based, then you're getting farther away from Nintendo's roots and more generic in like the RPG open world style.
Yeah, I think for me, what I'd love to see, and Jake, I'd like to hear a little bit more of what you do want from it. But I think this is Breath of the Wild, and then the next game I want Depth of the Wild. They have this all created, and like I mentioned before, I think now you have a chance to really dig your toes in, and it's so fun just to roam these areas. But if you step back and consider it, they're pretty bland in a lot of ways. I would love to see a much more cinematic and set piece driven structure to the world, and I think that that's achievable now that you spent so much time on building the world, building the mechanics, building the physics, building the engine. Now you could do where like, okay, the Zora area is way more blitzed out and way more palaces and royal, and you could do a really epic snowy ruins dungeon, or like I said, like a cliffside ruins dungeon, or a really interesting I know it's not like the best dungeon, but I really liked how they incorporated a roller coaster into one of their dungeons, and I'd love to see like that kind of creative design be sort of stamped into this more open style, because then your exploration, like, it's great to get rewarded with a treasure chest and have some arrows, or it's great to get rewarded with a Korok seed, but imagine if you're rewarded with like brilliant sights and amazing structures, and sort of taking a little bit of like that set piece, more linear, almost like an Uncharted type story-driven area design, where then you have these places that it is open, it is explorable, you can come across them in any order whenever you want, but you're like, whoa. And I know there's still some of those moments in Breath of the Wild, and it's a beautiful landscape, a gorgeous world, but imagine if it was dotted with even more variety, even more depth, and I think that is where I'd like it to go. I don't think, for me, I need them to dive any deeper into the stats or whatnot. I don't know that Zelda should ever be a Dark Souls or a have all these combos or all these stats. But I do like the idea of filling it in more, and maybe, maybe this one is the real big, bold, open, like, whoa, what if Zelda was huge? We explore it. And the next one is, okay, let's take these systems and work it into more of a set-piece driven linear Zelda that still is open but has some of the trappings of that classic. So maybe it is kind of what you said, Gabe, where maybe they do bring back and sort of merge the two as opposed to having them drift separately.
Yeah.
Jake, any extra things you wanted to add that you'd like?
No, I think you kind of were just saying my idea just in a different way. But yeah, I think it'd be really cool to just like have, instead of one giant map, like maybe you have like a subterranean map area and then like a terrain map area and then like a sky map area that you can like switch between, or like a light dark world or something like that. I think that's kind of what I was saying.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. And I think, I think all of us can safely say we want more dungeons because those are super cool. And I think that's a great microcosm of what more in-depth environmental design could do for the game, because those are, to me, outside of the little anecdotal water cooler moments that happen randomly, the dungeons are like the highlights of that world, and so I'd love more of that. Let us know in the comments down below what you would like more of from Zelda in the future, what you'd like less of, what you'd like different, and how you feel about Aonuma stating that for the foreseeable future, Zelda will probably be an open world, open air style franchise. And granted, we may get some 2D stuff that's more of like the handheld style, and I hope we do. I think that would be fantastic on Switch as well. But let us know your thoughts and your take on this. In the meantime, everybody, we are going to get out of here. For myself, Jake, and Gabe, thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay up to date on all the latest and greatest from Zelda, Mario, and more on the Switch. Until then, though, everybody, thanks a lot for watching. Have a fantastic day. Switch Force out. Force out.